because no thunderstorm here.
So we are about
not
to
yet,
live.
Robin, not yet.
Not yet.
So we're about to go live, so maybe ask everybody to switch the camera off. Only
Yeah,
the moderator would keep it
exactly.
on.
Please switch off the camera. I will invite you later when you're joining us.
Okay, we are live.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you back after the lunch break and other interesting presentations that you have had. To start off this afternoon session, I would just like to introduce very briefly what we are talking about. So we are all aware that the EU agreed in 2020 to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, compared to the 1990 level, and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And in this context, Housing Europe has presented also the ambition to renovate 4 million homes by 2030. And this ambition will only be achievable if the right framework as well as the right policies have been put in place. Hence, in this afternoon session, we will learn from 7 outstanding speakers and experts in the field on what is the right thing to do to support the decarbonization of social, cooperative and public housing, to ensure a fair energy transition with a high level of quality of life and an affordable cost of living. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to chair this exciting session, and my name is Holger Wallbaum. I'm professor in sustainable building at the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering at Chalmers Technical University in Gothenburg in Sweden. I've been working a lot on renovation projects all over Europe, coordinating some of the FP7 Horizon 2020 research programs. And I'm, together with Julie Lawson, one of the co-authors of the current report written within the Housing 2030 initiative of UN Habitat Housing Europe. I'm delighted to be here. But it's not about me, it's about the session, and we have a very tight schedule. So I would suggest that we start immediately with the introduction of the speakers today. So after the introduction, I will be happy to hand over to Robin van Leyen and Julian from Housing Europe and Robin from AIDES. And both of them will talk about why can social housing provide a template for 2015. And then handing over a little bit later to Stefan Moser, who is with the DG Energy at the European Commission, before handing over to Natalia and Ignacio that will introduce from the Danish Social Housing Federation perspective and the Basque government perspective about the if there is a lack of funding and if this is really an issue. And finally, I'm happy to introduce and invite Shiran Kaf, member of the European Parliament, and Robert Dijksterhuis, Dutch Ministry of Interior and Kingdom Relations. And they will introduce the policy objectives for 2030 and 2050. So what you can see is an exciting program, exciting speakers, and a very tight schedule. So what we will do is we will have roughly 50 minutes of presentations from the speakers that I just introduced, opening up for questions and answers. There will be a chat opportunity. Please put your questions into the chat, and I'm happy to facilitating those. Good. To stick to the time plan, I would like to invite the first speaker, Robin van Leyen, to talk about the social housing. Please, Robin, the screen is yours.
Sure, happy to do so, and give me a moment to actually share my screen. Is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes, it is. Perfect. Thanks,
Great.
Robin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Robin van Leyen. I work for AIDES. I'm in charge of the European affairs. And AIDES is the Dutch association representing around 96% of all social housing providers from the Netherlands. Our members are very active in retrofitting their building stock, so I'll share some best practices from our members, but I'll also quickly discuss how that relates to the upcoming Fit for 55 package. First, I would like to give a brief introduction of the sector and the context that the sector operates in. Important to stress is that there are private, non-profit, and non-governmental organizations that are entrusted with an SGI of offering affordable housing. So affordability and affordability of rents remains our most important social mission. Our main source of revenue is rents, although we do receive some subsidies for building renovations. And in Dutch legislation, the Dutch Housing Act, it's entrenched that all earnings by our members must be reinvested again into social housing. So it's a closed system, and this is actually visualized on the picture on my sheet, the pie chart. There you see the subsidies for building renovation, you see the rental incomes, and those revenues have to be invested in either affordability by capping rents below market prices, availability by building sufficient new homes, and sustainability by retrofitting the building stock. If you take a closer look and a closer consideration at this model, you can also see that our members are actually facing a difficult balancing act between those three goals, because significant investments are needed in all of them. Just some figures, there's a housing shortage in the Netherlands, 331,000 dwellings. We expect that 1 million new homes will need to be built in the next 10 years, not only social housing homes, but also the private sector. Ambitions of the climate agreement on energetic renovations are already quite high. Our sector has the ambition to renovate 450,000 homes by 2030. And about a year ago, EDES, together with the Dutch government, did a fact-finding study where we modeled those three assignments for the next years and plotted them against future revenue streams. And the main conclusion was that by the year of 2035, the sector will face a financial shortage or a financial gap of 30 billion euro. So the model and the system is under some pressure. I quickly moved to the Dutch climate agreement. This was closed in 2018, and it includes a separate chapter for the built environment. And here in this picture, you see a complete overall picture of everything that's included into the built environment chapter. I will not go into it in very detail. This is actually just to give you a taste, to give you an expression, or an impression, I mean, because the main and most important parts are actually into my next sheet. And that is this sheet. And this sheet demonstrates the climate policy landscape of a Dutch housing association after the Fit for 55 package that's coming up this year. And I can imagine that this looks a little bit complicated, but allow me to be a tour guide through this landscape. And I'll start with that by explaining the orange bar at the bottom of the presentation. And that orange bar represents the Dutch climate agreement that was closed in 2018. The overall ambition of that climate agreement is to reach 49% reduction in 2030. And for the built environment, that means an additional reduction of 3.4 megaton. That is translated into making sure that 1.5 million homes will become natural gas free. And the social housing sector has the ambition to do 1/3 of that, and that's the 450,000 homes that I referred to earlier. The Dutch government is also developing an installation standard, and this standard will become compulsory by the year 2050, allowing everybody to make steps towards that standard at natural points in time when you do your regular plant maintenance. For the fuel switch, we have a focus on the district, a district approach. And the idea here is to reconnect or disconnect entire districts of natural gas and reconnect them to a sustainable heating source. Here, municipalities are in the driving seats, and they are required to draft long-term roadmaps where they plan which districts will be removed of natural gas at what point in time. In the far right side of the sheet, you see the social rent agreement. And you may have noticed that apart from these 3 bars, we also have some oval circles representing affordability and new constructions, our other 2 missions. And the social rent agreement is actually where our energy ambition meets our affordability ambition or mission. We closed a social rent agreement with the Dutch tenant organization, and the main principle on energy is that we may increase rents after renovation, but not with a higher amount than the savings on the energy bill, keeping it cost neutral to the tenant. The issue with that is that building renovation is still quite expensive. So the investments that you do to renovate a building are not earned back by limited rent increases. So in a way, building renovation does contribute to that financial shortage of 30 billion that we will face in 2035. I'm moving to my second bar on the sheet, the EU climate law, in EU blue as well. And here I would like to discuss the implications of the EU climate law and the 55% target on national policies. So not so much the European legislative package, but on the national level. Because when the EU moves to 55%, this will most probably lead to higher targets for member states from the effort sharing regulation. Apart from that, some member states, and we saw this already from Germany, may decide, okay, if the EU will go for a higher 2030 target, maybe we should put a higher EU target or a higher target in the national law as well. What happened in the Netherlands is that a group of senior civil servants did a study that analyzed and identified what that would mean for the Dutch climate policy. And for the built environment, their estimate is that an additional 1 to 4 megaton would need to be reduced from the built environment on top of the already 3.4 megaton from the climate agreement. So additional effort is needed. And for that, they also made a menu basically of additional measures that could be taken to reach these additional reductions. And the decision on these additional measures, is left to a next government because we just had elections in the Netherlands. So this will be decided upon on a later point of time. If I move to my third bar, it resembles the Fit for 55 package. And that's the package that's coming up in the summer and by the end of the year. That will introduce maps, might introduce maps, possible extension of ETS to the built environment, minimal shares of renewables in buildings, electromobility, climate adaptation, circularity, EPC, and possibly an updated definition of NZEP. Here is where it becomes really complicated for us, because this comes on top of the climate law, the Dutch climate agreement in the Netherlands. It comes on top of the additional ESR targets. And apart from that, these measures do not only set a target that we need to achieve, it also prescribes which methods and which measures you should take to reach that target. And that becomes tricky. For example, the Dutch government is developing an insulation standard, while the European Commission might introduce maps. So we wonder what that would mean for our members. Will they have 2 different standards from 2 different legislators that they need to comply with at 2 different points of time with different trigger points as well? That's complex. For the fuel switch, as stressed before, the Dutch focus is on the district level. The upcoming revision of the RED might introduce strengthened provisions of minimum shares of renewables at the building level. So also there you have a different of scope, building, district, which can be very complicated. And apart from these specific examples, the overall regulatory landscape becomes very complicated. Which brings me to some of my key messages that I would like to share, that our concern is that this will lead to over-regulating the built environment. And our call is to put more focus on the regulation. We have a national approach, and I'm sure this isn't the case in other member states as well. We will get higher ESR targets, and the provisions from the Fit for 55 package that are listed here come on top of that. Some of them actually clearly target building renovation. Some of them even have a wider scope than that. So more focus is definitely something that we call for. The second key message is that we need national policy space. Several initiatives are in progress. I stressed that before. And what could be very complex is that in parallel to that, or possibly even sometimes undermining to that, you will have a European trajectory as well. We should make sure that those two approaches fit in as much as possible, and that requires national policy space, in our perspective. My third key message is about the financing. Historic amounts are actually available in Next Generation EU, but they are still largely insufficient to finance the renovation wave. To make the case for that, if we, as social housing sector in the Netherlands, were to renovate all of our E, F, and G labels by insulating them to the level of the insulation standard, that would almost fully absorb the financial amount available to the Netherlands from the recovery and the resilience facility. Then I'm only talking about the worst performing labels, not all labels, the social housing stock, not the entire building stock, and insulation and not the fuel switch. And moreover, at this point, we don't even know whether a single euro in the Dutch recovery plan will be allocated to building renovation, because we did not submit a recovery plan yet. And I know from some of my colleagues from other countries that it is not a given that building renovation is to be included in the recovery plan. So for us, this remains to be a question mark. So in sum, my conclusion or my general comments, we fully support the goals of the renovation wave, and our sector really is committed to reaching a carbon neutral building stock. That we really have some concerns about the way things are heading now. And hereby our concern is that with not enough focus, with not enough policy space, and with not enough public funding, it will actually be very hard for us and for our members to make the renovation wave to a success. And with that closing comment, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. Very interesting start into the discussion. We will hear about different policy measures and the distribution within the EU member states a little bit later by other colleagues. Thanks a lot. I'm very happy to hand over to Julien, who will take a more European perspective now and highlighting the key elements of the fair energy transition in the social housing sector. Please, Julien, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Olga. Do you see the screen now?
Yes, but not in the presentation mode.
Okay. In fact, I had prepared a presentation with different slides, several slides, but now first I'd like to make sure we keep on time and we have time for discussion. And but also I would like directly to follow up on what Robin just presented. I think it's interesting what he presented is the example of a country, the Netherlands, which are getting ready for 2050 in terms of the carbon neutrality objective, and putting the social housing at the core of this, in a way, of this mission. And now I'd like to zoom out a bit and take the perspective of the European Union as a whole. And one of the key things, we've noticed, and I will share the presentation for the graph and details, but I'd like to focus on that slide in particular. What we've noticed is that in many European countries, social housing providers are leading already from basically many years, 10 years, the fair energy transition. Well, this is not a surprise. This is the only sector which is regulated first and who has the capacities, including the skills and the ability through procurement and other tools to steer the supply chain. So social housing providers are leading the fair energy transition. There's an amount of evidence about that. Second point, their main mission is to provide affordable and high quality homes for those who need them. That is a traditional and historically a very well anchored mission. COVID has, of course, made a tremendous change in that landscape. It has exacerbated the demand for social housing, although it's yet to be materialized and translated into proper figures, but we already see signs of this coming. So COVID has had an impact on that mission. The notion of quality homes now encompasses also climate and sustainability requirement. It was before COVID, obviously, but it's clearly part of the portfolio of activities of social housing, social cooperative and public housing providers over Europe. And what we can say and can see is that the sector has embarked for about 10 years on a cultural change, what we call the low carbon culture, in both new construction and renovation. And that's very important to also take notice of. This is also the reason why we talk about leading the fair energy transition, because this cultural change has happened actually since indeed the year 2010 approximately. This cultural change is now integrated into the wider discussion on what social housing means and brings to the 21st century society. There's a clearly wider sense of societal responsibility. So we have here a very crucial question, which is, will social housing providers have the means to carry out their missions and ambition, including the one on climate and sustainability, into the next decade? This ambition, indeed, you mentioned that, Holger, at the beginning. We've made this clear ambition about renovating 4 million homes by 2030, which is 400,000 homes every year, basically. It's very important to know that the sector only represents 10 to 11% of the total housing stock in Europe. So whatever successful or however successful the sector can be, or in terms of leading the way, it will only represent 10 to 12%. But it's a very important 10 to 12%, because this is actually where people with low income, people with housing needs live. So we basically make the double, in a way, the double success of looking at environment, but also social justice. And what is very important also to bear in mind in this whole discussion is the fact that, and this is although another reason why social housing is leading the way, is that this is actually a beacon for innovation in the sustainability area. Social housing organizations are leading in innovations for sustainability in many aspects. And I just noticed now some of the most striking aspects we could discuss on later. So clearly, for instance, we have social housing as being a partner in open innovation testbed for new facades, buildings as material banks for greater circularity, improving interfaces between energy management systems and residents. This is a very key point, the empowerment of residents, contributing to positive energy districts. We talk about the district approach, and this is obviously something where we want to see some improvement and progress. We talk about factory-built renovation components and digital tools for renovation, which at the end of the day are about making renovation more cost-effective, but also making sure that they are acceptable for residents who are, particularly, of course, in the homeowner sector, who are really some concerns about the balance between cost and benefits. So those innovations are taking place in the social housing sector mostly. And so what I like to conclude on is to say that we are the template for a very good way of doing the decarbonization of the building stock, thanks to the social housing sector. It may represent only 10%, but we see in this sector all the ingredients coming together. Now the big question for the policy is what do we do? Can we just take some of those ingredients and translate it into the homeowners sector, which actually is the bulk of the challenge? Can we basically continue to support, rather than hamper, support social housing and cooperative housing and public housing in doing this fair energy transition? Can we create this very important ecosystem built on cooperation rather than trying to somehow indeed put more obstacles on the way to the fair energy transition? So we have plenty of question marks for the policy, but what we've seen clearly is that we have a kind of template, which is the one proposed by social housing providers all over Europe, not only in the Netherlands, but in many different geographical areas from the north to the southern European sphere. So I'd like to stop here, and I'm really looking forward to having a discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Julian. Impressive list of innovations for sustainability that is really coming, and the social housing organizations in Europe have contributed to. Considering the time, I need to be really the bad guy now and to keep it very short to allow the other speakers to get their fair share as well in the presentation. Maybe a very short one for Robin about, I think looking on this is a policy session, and looking what the Netherlands are really currently doing, I think there are not many countries that can really show this very interesting progress that has been made on innovations, especially in the area of housing. What would you think, or could you share with us, what are the success factors for very interesting climate policy landscape that you have been able to build up in the Netherlands? Anything to share with us?
I think that the Dutch nature of decentralized decision-making, in the Netherlands we call that polderen. I've tried looking it up in the dictionary, but there's actually no English term for it. But it can best be explained as a collaborative approach to decision-making, where you rather put the focus on soft law and the soft sector agreements to actually get to a point that everybody wants to get to. And that worked quite well in the Netherlands, I would say.
Well, that's very interesting, and certainly a thing that we can learn from. And a very short one to you also, Julian. What you have presented and the solutions and the needs, how would you regard the necessity to regionalize approaches, to make them really fit to the different circumstances that we do see in certain regions of Europe?
One important aspect that I didn't have time to dwell on is of course that decarbonization will only succeed if we look at heating systems, if we look at the energy resources that regions, cities have at their disposal. One of the graphs I wanted to show is about Sweden. We see how successful Sweden has been in decarbonizing the building stock by particularly making sure that the fuel mix or that the heating system is carbon-free or decarbonized. And obviously it works well when we look at the regional level and the different energy sources that are available. So that's one thing. The other thing is obviously that the fair energy transition we see in the social housing sector only works because of, or thanks to, the cooperation and acceptance of the residents, tenants. We are the best place to have this great cooperation with tenants, not only to make sure that new apartments are well used and we avoid the rebound effect, which actually is a true effect, but also because when we design renovation project, we have to make sure that we go beyond the notion of energy performance. We need to talk about summer comfort. We need to talk about livability. And this is only happening at the local, regional level with the residents.
Thank you very much, Julian, also for being brief. I know that both of you would deserve more time to Q&A, but unfortunately we haven't got the time today. Thanks again for your very interesting presentations to kick this policy session off. And now I would like to invite Stefan Moser, the head of the Unit for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, that's the DG Energy, that's the European Commission, with a very interesting title, Renovation Wave or Regulation Wave, which is a rather provocative question, obviously. There's an important point about it, obviously, to find the right balance between the different elements of a strategy to decarbonize the residential buildings. So, and the revision of the EU legislation on energy will have a key role to play. And so far, we are looking forward to see which vision does the European Commission want to promote. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Holger, and also to Julien for the kind invitation and the interesting exchange already so far with Robin, also on the Dutch experience. And of course your various practices which are very much advanced, and that is, I think, is also what Julien said. You have gone already a long way towards what needs to be done in the Netherlands, but not everyone has done that. So I think that is somehow the policy dilemma at European level, that we need to make policies for the whole of the EU, and of course those who have moved forward already a long way, they would then, of course, as I see it reflected in your statements, fear that this would, to some extent, require further changes, which you don't want to do. I think we do recognize that, and as a legitimate concern on your side, but there's no way out. I mean, we can, for instance, not just say the Netherlands is going fine, so let's just drop it for the rest. And you're not the only country, of course, but we are far from doing enough in all member states. I think that is the problem which we have. And in terms of presentation, I would like to share with you the slides. I hope you can see them. So some of them have been used already, so I will focus primarily on the legislative changes, as the title is also a regulation wave, renovation wave or regulation wave. So it's certainly at the highest possible level that the renovation wave has gained traction. It is part of the Green Deal and the climate target plan. It's an intrinsic component of our efforts to meeting the increased climate target. It requires a holistic agenda, definitely. So not to think only about climate and energy, only in inverted commas, but also about quality of life, safety, circularity, and actually how we want to live in the future by integrating also the transport system much better and renewable energy more broadly. So it goes far beyond insulating buildings, for instance, but rather making buildings more active parts of our lives, and we as citizens, as inhabitants of buildings, more active participants in the steering of the energy and transport system and how we manage our buildings and the built environment more broadly. The buildings have become
Stefan,
more important. Yes.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but at least on my screen, I have a black box, which might be the participants, which is hiding a part of your presentation to the right. Okay. I don't know if this is the same for the others.
No,
maybe
but
I can move it away.
Has nothing to do with Stefan. Holger, you can put it down yourself.
Yes, I think, are they gone now, the participants?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I've moved them away.
It's good.
Okay,
perfect.
very
Thanks a lot, Stefan.
I've moved them to the side. Sorry for that. Thanks for saying that. So and the buildings will probably also in the future play a bigger role than so far in terms of attention given, in terms of services they provide to us as focal points of our lives. There will probably be more teleworking also in the future after the pandemic. There's now certainly a change of our working lives, moving more away from offices and commuting every day to a kind of combined work life teaching experience. But this is in the making. We don't know yet what the future will bring, but it seems that there will be more focus also on residential buildings to spend part of the day, part of working time also there. for the overall benefits of society and citizens as they define them. So this is now a major chance for us to get it to make significant improvements, but also to use the building sector as actually a helping hand to other parts of the economy, which will possibly and unfortunately suffer structural decline. There will be changes in the economy, it seems, partly even from the car industry, that with electric cars there will be less employment in the car sector, but there is a very high level of skills, for instance, in some of those sectors, and possibly this will create then employment opportunities for people who can be trained, retrained, and even young people can be attracted. So we see that as really as a kind of multi-benefit win-win strategy, but also from the social side, inclusion of society, inclusion, and you as social housing corporations play an extremely important role in that respect in any case, but of course not in all member states social housing is yet at the level where we can say this is good enough. So many houses actually suffer from low quality, low levels of safety, humidity, and health problems created inside. So the political objective is to at least double renovation rates, and also to deepen renovations whenever they're carried out, to think about the broader agenda, not just repair something when something is broken, but rather when something needs to be done, to think more broadly and use the opportunity of that. And then think about energy and resource efficiency, circularity, materials being stored inside buildings to be recovered, and of course also about the carbon footprint of buildings more broadly in the construction, but also the materials being used, and digitalization as a major enabler. Currently, we are simply far from being where we need to be. So about 1% of buildings undergo only energy efficient renovations every year. This has to at least double. And 3/4 of our building stock is energy inefficient. And most buildings, the very large majority of today's buildings, will still be there in 2050. So we cannot rely on new buildings doing the trick, resolving the issue. We have to work on renovations and renovating the existing building stock, also in the interest of city development, of reducing pressure on the natural environment, not just sprawl cities to the green areas, but rather repair what is already there, renovate and make it better. A significant number of jobs is likely to be created, as said, and we expect that by 2030, about 10 million buildings could be renovated more, 35 million buildings instead of just 25, and also in a deeper manner than if there was not such a kind of increased effort now with the renovation wave. What is absolutely crucial is the decarbonization of heating and cooling. That's one of the focus areas, but then also tackling energy poverty, difficult living conditions, addressing mostly the worst performing buildings, but of course not only, but certainly the worst performing buildings have the biggest potential and show the biggest benefits of addressing them in renovations. And then of course public buildings and social infrastructure as buildings which provide extremely important services to society, where the quality is not often or not always, and in many cases actually not as good as it could be. So a renovation in terms of climate and energy performance can also lead to a higher quality of education and healthcare, for instance, and the office environment in administrative buildings. We will not have just one single tool, so that's why there may be this impression of many measures being put in place, but we will need to address very specifically and carefully the different barriers encountered. This has to be analyzed. What barriers do we face? Regulatory, information, funding, technical advice, etc. And then see how we can work on each of those barriers in order collectively then to have a real jump forward. So there's not the one silver bullet solution in this sector which would do the trick. And there are also many subsectors in the building sector. So of course there's a social housing sector, but there's the private residential, one family houses or two family houses, And then, of course, the public buildings, as mentioned, and then the multi-apartment houses, which are not social houses often. Yeah, they're simply they follow a different regime and different rules partly. Yeah? So where there's no public role in principle. But we do see a very important public role in funding. To basically create a public good. The public good is something which goes beyond the private benefits, which is social inclusion. It is higher quality of life and safety, and better building services, which benefit society overall and go beyond the private advantage. Therefore, we cannot rely on private individuals facing the whole bill. We simply would not get where we need to go. And also from the energy system and climate policy objectives, this is partly a public good as well. So that's why we need to put in massive amounts of public money in order to avoid that. Basically, we would only address part of the necessary measures in terms of renovations. So we have identified in the renovation wave 7 lead intervention areas. One is the information, legal certainty, and regulation. That's basically the main focus of this session, but also funding, accessible and well targeted, and then extremely important to accompany that, technical and project assistance, ideally through one-stop shops. And then we have broader considerations and certain focus areas where we need to have a kind of targeted look, which is the decarbonization of heating and cooling, addressing energy poverty and healthy housing, but then also smartness, digitalization, integrated approaches to in districts, energy communities, and then more broadly the competitiveness and the attractiveness of the construction sector and the ability to deliver, to expand really capacity, provide industrialized and standardized solutions, and also to have a bigger and more skilled workforce, training people, attracting young people to get in, making it more attractive to actually work there. So there's a lot to be done in that respect. This is a major bottleneck, and it's a make or break, basically, in our view, both on the skill side, but also on the capacity, on the physical capacity side of the construction sector. So the focus areas, this is more for documentation with some further details on heating and cooling, energy poverty, and public buildings, the focus areas of the renovation wave. And then maybe a summary on the regulatory solutions, standard and information. So what we intend to do is a phased introduction of mandatory minimum energy performance standards for existing buildings, then updated rules for energy performance certificates, and the extension of building renovation requirements for the public sector. The funding side, we have the recovery plans, but also the multi-annual financial framework, where we need to combine the different pots of money, simplify rules, and have also multiple incentives to bring in private financing. Very important. The public money will not be enough. It has to be combined to create incentives for massive inflow of private financing to make it attractive, to reduce risks. And there are several tools for that, but we will of course now have to implement this in close cooperation with the financial institutions and also the private sector. As I mentioned already, increasing capacity of the renovation building sector is crucial. New green jobs, and expand also the market for sustainable construction products and services. Nature-based solutions, but also new sustainable materials. So think about the carbon footprint and the overall environmental footprint. And of course, recyclability, circularity, recovery of materials when a building is changed or broken down again in the future. So to avoid massive amounts of waste. Then, as mentioned already by Robin, we support that very much, a neighborhood-based and district approach where local communities, but also municipalities are in the driving seat. They know best their buildings. They need to identify what to do together with the citizens in close cooperation and to have a common agenda, really, develop roadmaps. It will not be enough to work just on individual buildings. This is too costly because you cannot professionalize. It is too cumbersome. for individuals to do that, and there are too many barriers to also attract the necessary financing. The volumes are too small, so you need to create bigger packages here, and then you create also the necessary momentum. There's also a strategy on affordable housing at the European level, so to showcase about 100 districts to really show how this can work. And then maybe more specifically on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive revision, because this workshop is about regulation. So this slide is more like an overview on the milestones and key steps. We are currently in the phase of the public consultation, which goes on until the 22nd of June. We encourage you very warmly to contribute to that, have your say. There's a portal, there's a link also on the slide. And we have also targeted stakeholder consultation workshops, which are going on. So there will be further such stakeholder workshops in May and June. And we have had already a number of them, but we encourage all of you to either participate or contribute by having your say or sending us bilateral position papers. And we have also had meetings. I'm very grateful for hearing your views, but also criticism and comments. That's very welcome. What we need to do now is to have a complete analysis in the impact assessments about all the pros and cons, not to be aware of all the aspects to be thought about. This is not yet drafting the legal text. This is really the conceptual design of the new policy. And for that, we need to be aware of all concerns. The policy measures being considered and the goals is indeed to increase the renovation rate and depth with the minimum energy performance standards, but there are several design options. We need a phased approach and also certain flexibility for the member states. And then the deep renovation standards, this is really to have a common understanding what that actually means. So to revisit the minus 60% energy savings target to see what is really useful as being labeled as a deep renovation. And that can have implications for financial institutions, but also just that we have clarity about what we are talking. Then the building renovation passports is a very important information tool, and to link it with other information instruments in order to really have the necessary relevant evidence accessible for those who are taking decisions. For that, we need to strengthen also the energy performance certificates, the quality and comparability across the borders, and accessibility. So digitalize it and have national databases really, and enforce at the national level that they're taken seriously. There's no fake information in that, for instance. And then the decarbonization of buildings is crucial to include also a greenhouse gas emissions metric in the energy performance certificates and not just energy savings. Both have to go hand in hand. Both are relevant for different decisions, but greenhouse gases should become more and more also a decision-making basis, really. The smart readiness indicator, there we try to accelerate the next steps and create synergies with other tools. And electromobility is, of course, one of the most important interactions of society now to make sure that buildings can serve the needs of increased electromobility, that there are enough charging points, that there's space for electric vehicles, not just cars, but also scooters and bikes. And that's certainly a challenge for existing buildings to create the space because it was not foreseen at the time of construction. And then what we do very much appreciate is what Robin said, learn from national experiences, really what would be useful practice to share across other member states, the borders, to really get the best from what we have already in Europe and try to expand it. This goes, of course, hand in hand in any negotiation when you create a common framework with those who have actually done some very far-reaching steps that they might have to change to a certain degree. Otherwise, you will never get a European solution. So this is a kind of pioneering work. We do recognize the huge value, but it cannot be excluded at this stage that there would have to be some interactions then also with certain national frameworks. And the building types to be targeted are, well, the worst performing buildings, because they are the highest savings and benefits more broadly. And then we need to see what trigger points we actually will define, rent or sales. It is to some extent always artificial to have a trigger point, but you need to have a hook somewhere. You cannot just knock at the door and ring the bell and say, now your building looks a bit shabby, so let's renovate it. If someone just lives there and says, what is happening to me now? But there needs to be a certain trigger point, like a rent or a sale, where you can actually say, now is the time to do it. And then, of course, leave flexibility also to adapt to national specific circumstances. That's crucially important. We cannot harmonize in exactly the same manner everything in Europe. That's not appropriate. There are too many differences: climate, tradition, the quality of the building stock, the type of buildings available, etc. And also other risks like seismic risks and so on. Yeah? And then the level of ambition, there we need a clear progressive pathway, which is doing its part for the decarbonization in the long term, contribute what the housing sector needs to contribute. And then, very important, the critical social impacts have to be addressed at the same time. So rents cannot increase in the same manner as there would be benefits in principle to society for the quality of living improvements. There is a public component, a public good character in it. So therefore, a justification for state aid, either at the national level or at the European level. And there are also barriers which can only be addressed like that if there's a public part, like the split incentives, for instance, and housing affordability more broadly. People are sometimes already at the limit in expensive cities. They cannot afford any additional burden. And then, of course, for that, we need earmarked financial support and technical assistance. Technical assistance really in easy, accessible format, advice from the beginning to the end, taking someone through in a way which is easy to understand. And as said before, try to professionalize, aggregate, bring to a higher level, work with districts and neighborhoods and communities. The Bauhaus, this is more for documentation. This is just matching style with sustainability, and that's basically the end of the presentation. This is a separate initiative by the Commission, but it's a broader idea really to bring culture together with the functional aspects which I just said. Okay, thanks a lot for your attention, and this is basically now a very useful further exchange for us to learn from you and hear about your views. Thanks a lot. Sorry for taking a bit longer, Holger.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. Very interesting and important presentation. I think it was also mentioning that the European Commission is very often seen as a critical and difficult player. I think we have also to acknowledge that we are rather leading this development, and we are proud of being part of it. And that's important actually to also make progress in being a leading environment and sector globally, actually, to show what's possible on decarbonization. But it's also important what you mentioned. We are looking to forward to contributing to this housing, 100 affordable housing districts, for instance, affordable housing district. That's important. And so many of these things are really, really relevant. Just before having one question for you and handing over to the next speakers, I would like to encourage also the participants that are coming really from all over Europe that I've seen when glancing through the list of participants. Please put forward also your questions that I'm happy to putting forward. And otherwise, we will forward your questions actually to the speakers. Well, this is a very long question actually that I cannot take right now. Let's see, what you mentioned is really what we observed, skills and capacities of the people conducting planning and conducting also the renovation activities. We haven't seen many measures in this regard on all levels actually. Do you think that this is really an important element for a fair energy transition?
Absolutely. I think the skills need to be enhanced of those already working in the sector. Often there's not enough awareness of new technological innovations, for instance, and what are the needs to change certain practices. It's a human thing, a human normal behavior. You simply continue doing what you know best, yeah. So and this is often against somehow innovations. I think there needs to be a wave of trainings for those employed in the sector, and in particular the new people coming in. They can actually be also innovators, bring new approaches, and bringing in new people is absolutely essential because we need to increase so much the capacity of the sector that it's unavoidable. In some countries, we are already now at the upper limit of what the renovation and building sector can actually do. So we would never be able to handle additional renovations if we didn't bring in more people and more skills. So it needs to be at the focus of our efforts, really, together with the social partners, really. So that's the industry, the trade unions, the training institutes, educational programs, professional training, etc.
Yeah, I fully agree. We haven't seen actually also requirement to put on us as universities to deliver more and contribute more. We haven't neither received the resources nor have been put any requirements on us. I think this would also be an important point that we have to contribute to as well. But thanks a lot, Stefan. And if you would have the opportunity, please answer some of the questions that have been asked in the chat. That would be very much appreciated if possible. So what will happen, for instance, if states not applying the ambitions? What's happened if they fail, etc., etc.? Very interesting questions. Unfortunately, we will not be able to continue the discussion right now. Thank you very much again, Stefan, for your time.
Thank you very much, Holger.
Being with us. Thanks. So what we also have heard, and it has been introduced, that there's a widespread recognition of high level of investment that is required. This has been mentioned by Robin, what would be required actually. So, and what we are going to hear now are two speakers that will show examples of projects and strategies with a key role by public support. And let's start first with an example from the neighbor country here to Sweden, from Denmark, and their Marshall Plan for renovation. So we will start with Natalia Rogaszewska, who will talk about this, and then having afterwards Ignacio de la Puerta Rueda, who is the Director of Territorial Planning and Urban Agenda in the Basque government. So please, Natalia, good to have you with us, and
thank you very much.
Share your thoughts and knowledge with us.
Yes, thank you very much. And I need to share my screen. Can you see it now?
Not yet. Please, I don't see it.
Just a second.
Now it's coming.
Now it's coming.
Yes, here we go. It's
super.
Not the presentation mode yet, but
yes, there you go. Is it good now?
Yes, excellent.
Okay.
Thanks, Natalia.
So thank you very much, and thank you for super interesting intervention so far. Fasten your seatbelts because I have 7 minutes and 12 slides, and I'm really happy to present the issue of Denmark. So just to give you a brief background, who are we and who am I representing? We are the Danish Federation of Nonprofit Social Housing Providers. We have more than 500 members, more than 500,000 homes, and we have 1 million people living with us, which is 1/6 of the population. Really what is happening in Denmark right now is all the framework for everything is the Danish climate law, which is an overarching law agreed in December 2019 broadly in the parliament. And it has 3 overarching goals in order to support the green transition, is that it has to be positive, or it has to support business and industry. It has to be solutions that are the fastest and most cost-efficient transition for society, and also it has to be socially balanced, so that you don't have huge economic consequences for the people who cannot afford it. We know that renovation of existing building stock is one of the fastest and cheapest ways of going green for society and for the individuals. And this is in Danish. Sorry, I couldn't change it, but it just basically shows that energy renovations of buildings is the cheapest and the easiest way to deliver on energy savings. So the green transition becomes cheaper when consumption of energy decreases. Also, when energy consumption is kept low. Of course, this is good for household economies. And actually, we also know that in the course, for example, of 50 years, it is more than twice as expensive to demolish and build new than it is to renovate what we already have. So looking into the social nonprofit housing sector in Denmark, we are really the perfect place to start because we are a huge part of the housing market. So we have just over 20%. We need more renovations than we need new build, since most of the stock that we have today is the one that we will be living in the future. And then our tenants on average have lower income than the rest of society. On top of that, we have an annual renovation need of more than 650 million euro annually. So what we were pushing for and luckily got through with in 2020 was a broad political green housing agreement, which allocated a total of 4 billion euro from the National Building Fund for renovations in our housing sector in 2021 to 2026. And it is important to note that the National Building Fund is actually a private fund. So the money in the fund are created by savings that the tenants are making through the rent, but it is regulated by law. And so by political agreements, the politicians in the parliament set the economic framework. So they decide how much money the fund can invest in renovations, but the finance is the tenants themselves which are delivering it. And of course, this is used politically in times of economic crisis that we are also looking into today. So 2.5 billion euro was allocated for a queue of existing projects. So projects that were already waiting in queue to receive support from the fund. But because of the economic framework was not high enough, there was not money enough to allocate to these projects. So there was a big queue. And this queue was then decided to get rid of really fast. And on the picture, you can see this was also beneficial from a regional point of view because we have renovation projects all over the country. This is in Danish kroners, but it is basically the money allocated all over the country. So in 2020, we had 1.6 billion euro allocated, and this year it will be 900 million euro. So quite busy times for our sector. A lot of procurement going on, and we have 453 approved projects. And then on top of that, the green agreement also said that we have to have new criteria. So we have to screen all the projects in order to catch all of the green potential. And then again, also on top of that, we actually had to reevaluate the projects that the screening showed had the biggest energy efficiency potential. So if we look into what is there actually to win energy-wise, well, a substantial part of the queue, so as you can see, around 70% of the queue is built before 75. So it is 72,000 homes that we are looking into renovating, and 2/3 of the renovation projects concern the building envelope. So we are just renovating up until the standards that are there today. We are not going further because we want to spread the money that we have as far as possible. We don't want to have super green lighthouses. We want to have a green building stock on a broad perspective. And only by going that far, we have an estimated energy and CO2 savings of 30%. So we're really going for a green social housing sector, and these new green criteria for receiving support from the National Building Fund are of course made in order to give projects with energy savings and green initiatives priority, and then to change the way that it used to be, because we were used to giving support looking at the state of the building. So the physical state of the building, what is the need? So it was kind of an ER way of doing it, where the ones with the biggest need, the ones that were in the worst standard, receive support. Now we have to look at the need as well, but we also have to look at the potential of the greening. So the greening of the building and the state of the building has to go hand in hand when we are prioritizing which projects to support. What was else in the agreement? Another element was a green guarantee. So it's a total frame of 53.3 million euro, and 3.3 million are allocated this year, and then we will have 10 million euro annually from 22 to 26. And it is a guarantee that is given in the case where the energy savings are lower than estimated. So this is exactly in order to save-proof the rent, so to say, so that you don't, because we are trying to equalize the savings of the energy bill with the rise in the rent. And so if the energy savings are not as big as they were estimated to be, the rent or the costs will rise. So this is really a safeguarding of our tenants, basically, but also, of course, in order to push for actually having the energy savings that are estimated. So really looking for good and solid estimations of the energy savings. But also, how is this going to happen? This is mainly something that we are looking into having happening through private ESCO or EPC projects in all renovation projects. So this is a guarantee that will be used not only for projects in our social housing sector that will be giving support from the National Building Fund. These are for projects that are also not getting the support from the Building Fund. So all projects, renovation projects within the social housing sector. And it is estimated that this will generate 6 billion extra in private investment in green renovation towards 2026. So for example, where the National Building Fund stops, because we only renovate up until an economic break even, there will be a possibility of a green top up where private investors can come in. But green transition, the way we are really looking at it is, it's an agenda that we have to deliver on. So we want to also use it as a tool for an efficient social housing sector, because this will give us lower rents. And we are also looking into add-ons for welfare. So initiatives in the Green Housing Agreement are expected to give us energy savings on approximately 40 million euro. But we also want to do more, because if we can be effective and if we can create sustainable energy use, we can really optimize operations and in this way lower the rents as well. So what we are looking into at the moment is to spread knowledge about green investment. We are really looking into how we can inform our tenants on green behavior. And then we are also looking into the potential for accessibility renovations, because we know all over Europe we will have a lot of elderly people and they need accessibility within their homes. And when we are renovating, we might as well look into making some of the homes accessible so that we are already preparing them for the need that will come. And we have calculated that when we're doing this in connection with energy renovations, we can actually do it for 1/3 of the cost that it would cost the municipality, for example, to build new elderly homes. So this is really a potential we are looking into, how to combine energy renovations with accessibility renovations. And then the last slide, what we need, this is a tool that we are looking into right now, is to create a central social housing building register called the DCAB, which will be an on-the-go overview of the maintenance status of the building. So what is the need of maintenance? And of course, we need this in order to allocate to secure the right level of financial allocations. I don't know if this is the right word, but basically the costs of maintenance. This is included in the rent. So this is also really important for the tenants, because if we can have right level of allocations, we can have more efficient use of the social housing stock. We can have an even rent development. And then of course, we will have a well-kept housing stock. So the DCAB will give us a gathered overview of the maintenance status within the social housing sector. It will give us an overview of the need of financial allocation, but also of the energy saving, because this will be, we will have energy data here as well, like the energy labels, for example. So this will also be a really good base for attracting and for having a dialogue with private investors and green investment in general, because this will all be connected to the green screenings that we have to do of our housing stock. So we will know exactly what is the need and where is the biggest potential, and then we can decide how are we spending our money more wisely, because as I said before, we are also really looking into the balance between making super green lighthouses and spreading the investments out more evenly. So if you look at a sum up of our tools, in the case of Denmark, we have really used different tools for a 360 solution. We have an influx of finance from the National Building Fund, and this is also used as gearing for private investment, as I explained before. And then we have the guarantees in order to further attract and support private finance. We have regulations changing, or changes in regulations. So we have these new green criteria to ensure that we allocate money where they do most good. But then we actually also have, I haven't mentioned it here, but we also have a goal on skills. So we have to have 40% of all of our renovations have to have training. So we have to have youth or people in training within the sector there. Today we have 12%, so we have an add-on of 2% more up until 2026. And then really using the green transition as a platform for efficiency, because we need to keep rents low. So we also need to take responsibility there as much as we can as housing providers. And right now, the next step is also to look into how can we gear this with some of the EU funding that is out there already. So thank you very much. I hope it was not too speedy, but that was a brush up of the Danish case, and I'm always happy to elaborate.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Natalia. Exciting, actually. I'm a fan of DCAP. It's needed, actually. It's excellent to think about it. Data availability is one of the major bottlenecks in maintenance progress, actually. I would encourage as well the participants, again, please put your questions in the chat, and I would like Natalia to answer the questions in the chat. We will not have time to answer or to ask additional questions, actually. Thanks a lot again, Natalia. Exciting, really, and also that Denmark is setting CO2 targets for new buildings as well. It's really, really the right trend that you are turning to, I think. Thanks again. Now from the far north to the far south, which is the good thing about the EU as well. So we would like to invite Ignacio de la Puerta Rueda to share with us some thoughts about and lessons learned from the Spanish and the perspective as the Basque regional government. Examples showing the importance of the public lead, even for private homeowners. Ignacio, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this interesting session. I am talking about the people-centric approach, which is in the front page. And this underlines the need to link climate, energy, and other aspects with social justice, as Julian said before. From a government perspective, we are putting a high focus on this. And I also absolutely agree with Mr. Moser when he was talking about the need of put the focus on the neighborhood, the districts, as the main element in order to achieve the goals we have. According to the time I am expected to tell, I'm going to speak mainly about the financing, so I will focus them. But some data in order to explain how the Basque Country is. We're a very small region with about 7,000 square kilometers with 2.1 million people, with high density, very, very urban territory. But we say, despite the fact that we have a very high level of competences, we have 3 levels of administrative administrations in the territory, 251 municipalities, also 3 counties, which they have the competence in the tax. They are the administrations that have their own taxes. And then overall, these 2 levels, the vast government with high degree of policymaking autonomy. But of course, we must face this multi-level governance. According to our demographic challenge, we have a very high life expectancy, but a low fertility rate with a very, very age in the population. We have a very old stock building, mainly in urban and private owners, 93% of privately owned, and also very multifamily buildings in the old stock, 77%. That means we have very high problems in order to manage how to face this kind of interventions in our buildings. The main problem here is not the climate. As you know, in Southern Europe, we have a very, very warm climate. So this is not the main issue for the owners, but just the accessibility. Our old buildings are the homes of our grandmothers, our grandparents, and they have not accessibility. So this is the main problem here. But the main issue I would like to point out is that we have more than 50% of population living in vulnerable districts, according to the 2020 study we have just reviewed. And also we have 10% of population in very high risk of energy poverty. We have developed our urban agenda, which means we have an up to bottom approach, where we are focusing not only in the building stock, but urban regeneration from an integral point of view, including the technical uses, of course, the renovation buildings, urbanization, but also social and economical uses. But also we are putting this strategy from bottom up, trying to develop the pilot projects in our neighborhoods, working with population, with the inhabitants in these buildings, trying to develop a new model of business model according to this European project, Open Ela. We are trying to develop and implement different type of measures, not only energy, as I told previously. But we are trying to guarantee universal accessibility, safety, but also, of course, energy measures, not only active with heaters or kind of mechanisms, but also passive windows and so on. The range of investment are between 5,000 euros and 70,000 euros per dwelling, depending the ambition of the intervention and the typology of the homes, of the buildings. This means that the monthly payment capacity is very high, depending on the economy level, and it goes from 40 euros per month to 500 euros. What happens now is, and what we are seeing is that the financing is a real barrier, because the financial investment is very high. The average is about 40,000 euros dwelling in vulnerable areas, where the income, median income is about 14,000 euros. So very high investment for according to the incomes. There is a very lack of awareness of benefits and lack of critical mass for projects, and serious difficulties for banks to provide long-term financing to those who lack this financial capacity. This means that we have very strong barriers and lack of activity from the commercial banks for this kind of people. In the case that the banks are giving any kind of financing for renovation, building renovation, they are providing inadequate quotes with long terms, with terms in 3 or 5 years, no long terms, with high level of interest rates. That means that the quota per month is very high. And this means that this kind of people that live in these vulnerable areas have serious problems in order to give the payback of these loans. So we are facing this market failure because this kind of people are not achieving these financial elements in order to achieve the investment they must do. But on the other hand, the commercial bank are giving this kind of loans, but with this kind of percentage rate, when you are buying a phone, a mobile phone, or something like that, you are paying the rate about 20%. But when we pay, or these people pay with a credit card, the rate is over 25%. That means very high and not affordable for all people. So the formula of this project is trying to develop something that could be easy for people, affordable and fair. That means we are trying to develop the open project, Trust to Renovate, trustworthy for all the people, with no connection with the capacity to pay back. This project is focused on a model that will be developed for all the region, not only in the 2 projects that we are working in, but for all the region, all the Basque Country, trying to develop agreements between municipalities and this management entity, which is called Opengela Fundación, that will start with one-stop shops in all the neighborhoods. If we analyze the household incomes and the repayment capacity and the population, we are facing this kind of Gauss bell, where we have 3 kinds of population. One in the right, which is a standard personal law, which have enough resources in order to achieve the financial market, commercial market. But in the left, we have the lowest incomes, so probably the people that need the public administration support. And in the medium, we have a very high kind of population that they are not allowed to get the commercial bank loans, but they are not in the condition of the lowest income. And this is the main people that live in these neighborhoods in vulnerable situation. So what we are working on is how to face the financial instrument in order to guarantee that everybody can achieve the investment they must do in their own buildings. According to the cost of the investment in the percentage and the weight income, we are trying to develop some kind of loans, which must be loans and subsidies that must be repaid in 10 years if there is a transmission of the dwelling. This is approximately between 40 or 50% of the total cost. Additionally, we have individual loans subsidies for the people according to the incomes they have. The less income, the more subsidies. We have 3 blocks in this area. In the left, we have those that need the support of the administration, public administration. In the right, those that have the higher investment, the higher incomes, excuse me. And in the medium, those that are in this mass opengela, mass, it means plus. Additionally, some opengela, which is a mechanism of social support for the financing. In those elements, we have an element in which for €1 of the administration, public administration, we get €4 from the private funds in order to guarantee this finance. So in the left, we have those that are in the worst situation. They are, we can achieve a special loan that they can repay in 30 years with a very low rate of interest. In the medium, we have the people that are in this condition with that they are not able to get the loan from the banks. So we are giving these mechanisms of mass opengela financing so they can achieve the 100% of the investment. And in the right, we have those that they don't need the mass opengela mechanisms. Which are the benefits we have achieving? We are covering this 100% of the investment in each project. It's a system that we are managing through our one-stop shops, so easy and quick for the request process. It's not linked to life insurance or other similar products that usually banks try to connect. There is no fee for cancellation, previous cancellation. The payment deadline is up to 10 years. We are trying to prolong to 25 years. And the nominal interest rate is connected and linked to the excuse me, energy efficiency improvement ambition. Trying to connect the right with the ambition of the project. Excuse me. And in order to finalize, 5 key messages. 2050 decarbonization goals require a change of scope from buildings to neighborhoods. Not only energy efficiency, but also social investment. The neighborhood should be zero energy consumption, but also should be sinks of CO2 with a clear electricity mobility, with facilities connected to the neighborhood, trying to revitalize the vitality. It's need to identify the right triggers for renovation. In the Southern Europe is not energy efficiency, but we must also achieve this goal. A multi-stakeholder governance is a key message in this project. And management organization projects to district-based one-stop shop, giving and providing trust for citizens is essential and crucial. And the last, affordable financing requires a change of the scope of international markets because public authorities' role is key in this issue. We are talking about our grandparents that must live in better conditions they are doing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. Very interesting to see that the barriers are very similar in many other parts of Europe, actually, and it's a very good initiative that hopefully can also help them serve as a good example for other countries. Thanks a lot. Again.
Thanks a lot.
I would like to proceed as follows, that we are going to invite now Siran and Robert for their presentations, and Ignacio also to answer the questions in the chat. Thanks a lot again, Ignacio. So for the last presentation, the idea is now that we are wrapping up our session, and hopefully you can stay with us for another 15 to 20 minutes. That will help also to be on time for the next session that will start on 15:30. So this year will be obviously a very important year also for legislative proposals in the field of energy that will have long-lasting impacts on the way homes are built and renovated. And therefore, it's really crucial to get a policy right mix that supports social, cooperative, and public housing providers in achieving a fair energy transition and decarbonization. And we are very happy to have two very outstanding people with us, providing the last presentations here. So it's Siran Kaf, sorry for an awful pronunciation, maybe, member of the European Parliament from Ireland, who was also with the initiative of the European Parliament report on maximizing the energy efficiency potential of the EU building stock. Please, the floor is yours, Siran. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Holger. And don't worry about the mispronunciation. I'm sure my pronunciation of your name is equally bad. I'm Kieran Cuff, and it's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I think Natalie earlier said we should fasten our seatbelt for her whistle-stop PowerPoint presentation. But for me, you can actually take off your seatbelt. I have no PowerPoint slides, and I will be a little bit more relaxed, I hope. But I did like Natalie's reference to a Marshall Plan. And I think ambition is really important with the renovation wave. And I was also pleased that Stefan referred to the minimum energy performance standards. If done right, I think MEPS can be a very important part of what we're doing. And I also really enjoyed Ignacio's presentation on the finance, because lots of people are stuck in energy poverty and do not have the cash to actually make the renovation happen. And I do want to talk about that. And I saw in the questions that Anna Bajomi's question about the poorest households in Hungary, and Jasper Kohl's question, what if the state doesn't make the renovations happen? So there is a real poverty trap, and I think we need to be conscious of this at a national and at a European level. What do I want to say? I want to say we should be ambitious, and the Marshall Plan was a good analogy. I also want to talk about the bottom-up approach, and I want to talk about tapping into the money that is there, because there is a lot of money available, but we do need to tap into it and take advantage of the money that is available. And I think we can do that. And the last thing I want to say is that we should really lead with the user, with the tenant, and not the technology, because the technology is getting quite complicated for deep renovations. And I think we have to keep it simple, stupid, as they say, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Anyway, look, the renovation wave has paved the way for us to increase the number of renovations across the EU. But I'm worried that not enough is being done at a national level. BPIE had a report recently saying that the long-term renovation strategies that EU member states submitted to the European Commission are not in line with the objective of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. So that's worrying, because we know that 40% of the energy we use in Europe is used in buildings, and 36% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if we want to tackle the climate crisis, we need to start with buildings. Increasing the number of renovation projects in Europe is a win-win. It increases employment, it lowers energy bills, and reduces carbon emissions. And you've heard all the statistics earlier. 1 in 4 people in Europe are unable to adequately heat, light, or cool their homes. We have a lot of leaky buildings in energy poor areas. Ignacio talked about that in the Basque areas. And we know that a significant amount of buildings have leaking roofs, damp walls, poor foundations, poor window frames, and this impacts on 80 million people in Europe. So it's unacceptable. And if we can increase the rate of renovations by just 1%, it could lift around 7 million people out of energy poverty across Europe. But I think it is important that we adopt a bottom-up approach by enabling local communities to be the drivers of renovations in their areas. And you know, as we change the technologies that we put into homes, we need to get it right. Too often we put in complicated or sophisticated energy management systems that the tenant finds difficulty in operating. So we need good and simple technologies and controls that the tenant is comfortable with. Coming back to the European level, the Fit for 55 package is encapsulating a lot of the regulatory and legislative initiatives, many of which are coming through in June of this year and later on in the autumn with the launch of the revision of the energy performance in buildings directives. And we need to bring our laws in line with our 2030 and our 2050 climate obligations. Personally, I like the idea of revisiting the plans every 5 years instead of 10 years. That's what the Chinese do. I'm not saying that we have to adopt the Chinese approach, but they're pretty good at sticking to a plan and revising their plans every 5 years. Also within the Brussels bubble, you know, 10 years is a lifetime in Brussels years. The people who made decisions 10 years ago, not too many of them are still around in the same positions, and certainly in the world of politics. So I think a rolling 5-year revision might help us to not only plan ahead, but also revise the plan if we're not getting it right. So I think we do need this slightly faster pace. The Fit for 55 package is an opportunity for Europe to develop regulations and make our homes less energy intensive, safer, but also more comfortable for our citizens. With the pandemic, we're spending a lot of time indoors, and we know there is a huge difference between living in a comfortable, larger home that has an A energy rating, or living in a small apartment where you spend a lot of money on heating if you don't have the heating systems and the energy insulation. So we need the revisions of the Energy Performance in Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive to be environmentally correct, but also socially just. And that's a big theme that we have to get right. So for the Energy Efficiency Directive, we need to put more of an emphasis on fighting energy poverty and ensuring that social and public housing is prioritized as the primary target recipients for support under the directive. I do like the idea of getting it right with our public housing and with our social housing. There are many compelling reasons for starting with the most vulnerable and getting it right for them. I also advocate for a neighborhood approach when it comes to renovations, because neighborhoods have this sense of community buy-in, and also the typologies repeat themselves from one home to another. And finally, there's quite an opportunity for district heating and cooling. So there's a lot of buttons we can push if we work at a neighborhood level. One-stop shops, I also suggest are an invaluable tool for keeping stakeholders connected to energy efficiency and renovation projects. Here in Ireland, we have the Tipperary energy communities, and they've been able to promote energy savings in rural Ireland while keeping all members of the supply chain involved. I think if we can extend these cooperative communities to social housing, we'd see immediate benefits. And I think it's really important to listen to the voices of tenants, to work with the occupiers in order to improve the energy efficiency of public housing. Too often it's top down and the voices are not listened to, the actual occupiers of the homes. Critically, I would echo the point that Ignacio made, that tenants and occupiers of social housing shouldn't have to bear all of the costs of renovation schemes. And I think that's where the EU and the financial institutions need to make funds available for local authorities. And this is something I've heard from the European Investment Bank, the European Central Bank, and the other financial institutions. They want to see projects because there's lots of money floating around out there. If you put it into a bank, you get a negative rate of interest. If you put it into renovation projects, you're not going to make a fortune, but even if you can get 1%, 2%, or a 3% return, it's better than losing money by putting it in the bank. I do think we need to make sure it's not overly complicated. We're seeing a lot of hybrid financial models, and I think we do need to keep this relatively simple if we can, because for the tenants, certainly, they want to deal with one renovation agency. They don't want to have 3 or 4 different lines of communication that makes it overly complicated. We've already heard about the MEPS, the minimum energy performance standards. I won't dwell on that, but I think if it's done right with social safeguards, it can help ensure the affordability of our housing. I'm sure my time is coming to a close, but I do think the EU can help with the decarbonisation of heating and cooling. It's important that we no longer invest in more fossil gas infrastructure. We need to make the leap into electrification where we can and replace old gas boilers with modern heat pumps. Looking ahead into the decade ahead of us, we can ensure our buildings are healthy, safe, and secure. And I think we need that ambition with the European Green Deal. And I think there's a lot of positive changes that can bring together the fight against climate change, the fight to tackle energy poverty, and the negative economic impacts of COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very exciting listening to you, and I like especially also that you emphasize that we have to be ambitious, and you pointed out the opportunities that are there that are really supported by what you are framing within the European Parliament. So excellent, thanks a lot. I would like to invite as well the participants again. Please have your chats. Join Andoni with putting questions in the chat. And thanks again for your presentation. And then it's my honor to lead over to the final presenter, which I'm also looking very much forward to. It's Robert Dijksterhuis, who is the Dutch envoy for sustainable construction and one of the masterminds behind making really the renovation plan for the Netherlands. So I'm really looking forward also to listening to you. Please, Robert.
Well, thank you. It's always difficult to be the last speaker between coffee and the rest of the presentations, and even after so many eloquent other presentations. So, well, I'll try to keep it brief, but also, well, say some new things, although much of what I had anticipated to say has already been said in some form or another. So, yes, as you announced, I'm the envoy for sustainable building of the Netherlands, and this is a new position. It was established at the beginning of this year, and that's a response of our ministry to the European Green Deal, because we thought that, well, the European heads of government have signed such a very ambitious agenda, And now urgent work is needed on the implementation, and it was felt that we need to put some dedicated attention to it, to look at how the plans are being worked out, what they mean for Europe as a whole, but also what they mean for the Netherlands in particular. So that's what more or less what my job is right now. And after all, well, there's quite a number of far-reaching measures in store for us. And Stefan Moos already mentioned some of them, and he said, well, the first set will come in mid-July. So then we're talking about the EED and RED and the emissions trading system, etc. And then in the autumn, some more new regulations will be coming, especially the EPBD, of course, but also not to forget the CPR, the construction project regulation. And we have had some discussions on the taxonomy recently, and then, well, some of it has been presented, but some of it will follow as well in the end of the year. So altogether, we are talking about a quite radical overhaul of European regulations. And it's very good to have a very brief look at what this all has started. Well, and that's, well, we have a very huge environmental and climate problem. We cannot continue as we used to. We have to live, work, and consume fundamentally differently. We have to start with it today, not tomorrow, because every day that we wait only makes our task bigger. After all, we will have to remove every extra ton of CO2 from the air in order to halt global warming. So that's why it's good for us to steer towards this final target for climate neutrality by 2050, but also towards an ambitious intermediate target in 2030, because the more we achieve in the next 9 years, the easier it will be to achieve the ultimate target. So we have to start today, not tomorrow. And then the renovation of the built environment, that's a very important element in this, because, well, as it was already mentioned by several speakers before me, about 30 to 40% of CO2 emissions is coming from the built environment. So that's also a big part of the solution. And the good thing is that renovation of the built environment is actually a relatively cost-effective measure. Insulating a home leads to a lower energy bill and therefore pays for itself in the long term. And some measures, of course, have a longer payback period than others. And then we can discuss about an unprofitable top that has to be subsidized. But in the end, the majority of renovation measures pay for themselves. And this is quite different from, for example, CCS, so carbon capture and storage, because, well, removing CO2 from the air and storing it underground, that only costs money and it doesn't yield anything. So the more and the more deeply we renovate, the more we decarbonize, the less CO2 we ultimately need to extract from the air and store for a lot of wasted money. So financing the renovation should therefore not be a problem. It's more an issue of the distribution of costs and revenues among the different stakeholders, both at the moment of the investment as well as calculated over time. And we saw from the Danish example, but also from the Basque example, that there can be several solutions to this, like guarantees, regulations, and all kinds of financial instruments, but it is doable. And I think that is the core of the dialogue we should have with one another. So the dialogue, and that can be with the EU, and then many eyes focus on the RRF funds. Not today, but I saw that in the discussions yesterday, that everybody was looking at the RRF. But the dialogue must also, or maybe even more so, take place with the own national government, because the starting situation differs enormously from country to country. So every member state must develop their own smart policies that fit well into the national system of laws and regulations. Just an example, in the Netherlands, we are a net contributor to the RRF. So most of the solution of our problems will have to come from our national budget. And we don't look too much at the RRF funds because, well, for us, it's more costly than it brings money to us. And I do see an important role here for the members of Housing Europe and the International Union of Tenants. So after all, you are working on the cutting edge. You are working on the affordability, which is high in your priority list. as has been mentioned by Robin, but also by others this afternoon, because you always speak about with the voice of the people with low incomes, with the worst homes who are most at risk, but who can also most benefit from a good renovation strategy. So please make your voice heard. Provide policymakers such as myself, but also in Brussels, with concrete advice on how to make the plans that will be provided later this year better plans. And finally, and I fully agree with what Karen said just now, and also Ignacio, we need to work with the residents, we need to work with the tenants and devising tailor-made solutions. So that's what I like about also the new European Bauhaus initiative. It's about working together at a grassroots level in co-creation on a more beautiful, sustainable, inclusive society. So we need this change of mindset for the challenges ahead. We should not continue working in silos with developing sequential actions, but we should develop integrated, sustainable solutions together with people from all sides, all kinds of parties, so from tenants to stakeholders, governments, the private sector, banks, etc. So I look forward to working together with you, with others, and let's make something beautiful out of all the transitions that are coming ahead, and make a more beautiful world for ourselves, but also for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. Actually, what can I say now? Making a beautiful future together, how this cannot be topped, actually. So excellent. Thanks a lot. I think what we had very interesting presentations. We learned a lot. We have been confronted once again with the barriers that we are facing, but also with the opportunities. We have heard about different policy frameworks, policies that have been put in place that are really worked in different countries already. We have heard about the need also for additional financing to make this even more attractive, that a lot of these energy efficiency measures and a lot of renovation measures can be really counted home very easily and make them even economic more viable. We have also heard that it's urgent, we need to act now, or better yesterday actually than tomorrow. And we have also learned that we cannot really dedicate it to the market belief that this will solve the problem. This is certainly not happening. And we have also heard about the important and crucial role of social housing in this field to assure a fair transition, energy transition, and affordable housing, actually. So thanks a lot. I have to apologize that I haven't been able to keep the time, but it was too interesting, actually, to listening all of you. It was a shame that you couldn't have all more time and we couldn't really have more questions. But on behalf of Housing Europe, thanks a lot actually to the panelists for being with us this afternoon. Thanks a lot to all the participants for staying with us even 25 minutes longer than expected, and looking forward to working with you on a sustainable Europe and a sustainable housing globally. Thanks a lot for your passion. Take care. All the best.